The letter arrived at the University of Vermont's digital archives on a grey November morning, handwritten in shaking cursive and accompanied by a photograph wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. The return address bore the name Eleanor Whitmore, age 94, and the contents would soon plunge historical photography expert Dr. Amanda Sterling into one of the most chilling mysteries of her career. Dr. Sterling had spent 15 years analyzing Victorian-era photographs, specializing in the technical and cultural aspects of 19th-century family portraiture. She had seen thousands of formal family images, each telling stories of prosperity, loss, celebration, and the complex social dynamics of American families during the late 1800s. But nothing had prepared her for what Eleanor Whitmore's letter would reveal. The photograph inside the package was a beautifully preserved albumen print showing the Blackwood family of Rutland, Vermont, posed in their parlor sometime during the autumn of 1889. The composition was textbook Victorian. Stern patriarch Jonathan Blackwood, seated in the center, his wife Margaret beside him in dark silk, and their 4 children arranged around them in descending order of age. 16-year-old Catherine stood behind her parents, while 12-year-old Thomas, 8-year-old Mary, and 4-year-old Samuel were positioned to create a pleasing triangular composition. The photographer had captured every detail with remarkable clarity. The ornate wallpaper, the heavy furniture, the carefully arranged books and decorative objects all spoke of a prosperous middle-class family at the height of the Gilded Age. Jonathan's watch chain gleamed against his dark vest. Margaret's cameo brooch caught the light from the window, and the children's Sunday best clothes showed the careful attention to appearance that characterized formal Victorian photography. But Eleanor's letter explained why this seemingly perfect family portrait had disturbed her enough to seek expert analysis. According to her handwritten note, Eleanor was the great-granddaughter of little Samuel Blackwood, the youngest child in the photograph. The portrait had been passed down through 4 generations of the family, displayed prominently in homes from Vermont to California, as descendants moved and scattered across the country. Dr. Sterling, Eleanor's letter read, "I am writing to you because I have discovered something in this family photograph that has kept me awake for months. When I took the portrait to be professionally restored last spring, the conservator used digital enhancement techniques that revealed details invisible to the naked eye. What we found has shaken my faith in everything I thought I knew about my family's history." Eleanor's letter went on to describe how the restoration process had revealed something that no family member had ever noticed during more than a century of viewing the photograph. In the window behind the Blackwood family, barely visible in the original but unmistakably clear under digital enhancement, was a face pressed against the glass from the outside. The face appeared to belong to a young woman, perhaps in her 20s, with dark hair and hollow eyes that stared directly into the camera with an intensity that was deeply unsettling. She seemed to be watching the family portrait session from outside the house, her pale features almost ghostly against the darkness beyond the window. What made the discovery even more disturbing was that no one in Eleanor's extensive family genealogy matched the appearance of the figure in the window. 4 generations of descendants had preserved detailed records, photographs, and family stories, but none mentioned a young woman who might have been present during the 1889 portrait session. Dr. Sterling carefully examined the photograph using high-resolution scanning equipment, immediately confirming Eleanor's description of the mysterious figure. Under magnification, the face in the window became starkly clear, showing details that left no doubt about its human origin. The woman's features were sharp and well-defined, with an expression that suggested both longing and something darker that Dr. Sterling found difficult to identify. Most unsettling was the direct eye contact between the figure and the camera. While the Blackwood family members were posed and looking at the photographer as instructed, the woman in the window seemed to be staring directly through the lens, as if she were aware of being captured in the image, and was deliberately making contact with future viewers. The technical quality of the face was also puzzling. Despite being photographed through glass and from a greater distance than the family members, the woman's features showed remarkable clarity and detail. This suggested that she had been positioned very close to the window, perhaps with her face actually pressed against the glass as Eleanor had described. Dr. Sterling began researching the Blackwood family history, hoping to identify any relatives, servants, or neighbors who might have been present during the portrait session but excluded from the formal family arrangement. Victorian-era family photographs often involved complex social hierarchies, with servants, extended family members, and house guests sometimes present during photography sessions, but not included in the formal composition. The Blackwood family records preserved in the Rutland Historical Society revealed a prosperous merchant family with extensive business and social connections throughout Vermont and New England. Jonathan Blackwood had owned a successful dry goods store, while Margaret had been active in local charitable organizations and social clubs. The family had employed several domestic servants during the 1880s, but their descriptions and known photographs showed no resemblance to the mysterious woman in the window. The Blackwoods had also maintained correspondence with extended family members throughout New England, but genealogical research revealed no relatives who matched the appearance of the figure captured in the family portrait. Dr. Sterling expanded her investigation to include neighbors and community members who might have been present in the Blackwood household during the autumn of 1889. The photographer's appointment records, preserved in local business archives, showed that the portrait session had been conducted on October 15, 1889, by Harrison Studios of Rutland. The studio records indicated that the session had been scheduled for the Blackwood family only, with no mention of additional subjects or observers. Victorian photography sessions were typically private family affairs, conducted with great formality and attention to proper social protocols. The mystery deepened when Dr. Sterling discovered that October 1889 had been a period of unusual activity in the Blackwood household. Local newspaper accounts from that time reported that the family had been dealing with a series of mysterious incidents that had disturbed their normally peaceful domestic life. The Rutland Herald had published several brief items during September and October 1889, describing strange occurrences at the Blackwood residence. Windows had been found open, despite having been securely closed, objects had been moved during the night, and family members had reported hearing footsteps and voices when no one else was present in the house. Most relevant to the mysterious photograph was a report from October 12, 1889, just 3 days before the portrait session. According to the newspaper account, Margaret Blackwood had reported seeing a young woman standing in their garden during the early morning hours, watching the house with intense concentration. When Margaret had approached the window to get a better look at the figure, the woman had seemed to notice her attention and had moved closer to the house, eventually pressing her face against the parlor window before disappearing into the morning fog. The newspaper report had treated the incident as a curiosity rather than a serious concern, suggesting that the mysterious woman might have been a vagrant or someone suffering from mental disturbance who had become fixated on the Blackwood household. But the timing of this incident, occurring just days before the portrait session that captured a similar figure in the same window, suggested a more complex and disturbing pattern of behavior. Dr. Sterling consulted with Dr. Michael Thornton, a specialist in 19th-century photography techniques at Yale University, hoping to determine whether the face in the window could be explained through technical anomalies or photographic artifacts. Dr. Thornton's analysis confirmed that the image had been created using standard albumin print processes typical of 1880s studio photography. The photograph showed no evidence of double exposure, spirit photography techniques, or other manipulations that might have created the appearance of an additional figure. Most significantly, Dr. Thornton's examination revealed that the woman in the window had been photographed simultaneously with the Blackwood family, using the same lighting conditions and exposure time. The technical evidence indicated that she had been physically present outside the window during the portrait session. This analysis ruled out the possibility that the figure represented a reflection, shadow, or optical illusion. Someone had actually been standing outside the Blackwood house, watching through the window as the family posed for their portrait. Dr. Rains. Sterling decided to investigate the broader context of mysterious incidents in Rutland during 1889, hoping to discover whether other families or households had reported similar experiences with an unknown woman who seemed to be obsessively observing their domestic activities. Her research through local newspaper archives revealed a disturbing pattern of incidents throughout the Rutland area during the late 1880s. Multiple families had reported sightings of a young woman who would appear in their gardens, stand outside their windows, and watch their household activities with intense concentration. The woman was consistently described as having dark hair, pale features, and an unsettling stare that made observers extremely uncomfortable. She would appear suddenly, often during early morning or evening hours, and would disappear just as quickly when approached or confronted. Most families had initially dismissed these sightings as the behavior of a mentally disturbed vagrant, but the consistency of the descriptions and the woman's apparent focus on observing family life had begun to create concern throughout the community. The pattern of incidents had begun in early 1888 and had continued through the autumn of 1889, with the Blackwood portrait session appearing to represent one of the final documented sightings of the mysterious figure. Dr. Sterling's investigation took an unexpected turn when she discovered a missing person report filed with the Rutland County Sheriff's Department in November 1887. The report described a young woman named Sarah Whitmore who had disappeared from her family's farm on the outskirts of Rutland. Sarah had been 22 years old, with dark hair and pale features that matched the descriptions of the mysterious figure who had been observing local families. According to the missing person report, Sarah had been engaged to be married to a young farmer named William Crawford, but the engagement had ended abruptly when William had chosen to marry someone else instead. Sarah's family had reported that she had become increasingly withdrawn and obsessive following the broken engagement, spending hours watching other families through their windows and expressing bitter resentment toward couples and families who had achieved the domestic happiness that had been denied to her. The missing person investigation had revealed that Sarah had been seen in the area around Rutland for several months after her disappearance, always alone, and always observed watching families from a distance. The Sheriff's Department had concluded that she had likely left the area voluntarily, perhaps to escape the shame and disappointment of her broken engagement. But Dr. Sterling's research suggested that Sarah had never actually left Rutland. Instead, she appeared to have spent nearly 2 years systematically observing local families, perhaps seeking to understand or experience vicariously the domestic life that had been taken from her. The timing of Sarah's disappearance and the beginning of the mysterious sightings around Rutland matched perfectly, suggesting that the woman who had been watching the Blackwood family and others was indeed Sarah Whitmore, driven by obsession and psychological disturbance to spy on the families whose happiness reminded her of her own loss. Dr. Sterling contacted Eleanor Whitmore to share her findings about Sarah Whitmore, wondering whether there might be any family connection that could explain why Sarah had been particularly focused on observing the Blackwood household. Eleanor's response revealed a disturbing family secret that had been hidden for more than a century. According to Eleanor's research into her family genealogy, Sarah Whitmore had indeed been connected to the Blackwood family, but not in a way that had ever been publicly acknowledged. Eleanor's investigation had revealed that Sarah Whitmore had been the secret lover of Jonathan Blackwood, carrying on an affair that had continued even after Jonathan's marriage to Margaret and the birth of their children. The affair had been discovered by Margaret in the summer of 1887, leading to a confrontation that had ended Sarah's relationship with Jonathan and destroyed her plans for a future that she had believed would include him. Sarah's engagement to William Crawford had been a desperate attempt to create an alternative future after losing Jonathan, but her obsession with the man she couldn't have had sabotaged her ability to commit to anyone else. When William had ended their engagement, Sarah had been left with nothing but her obsession with Jonathan and bitter resentment toward the family that had taken her place in his life. Eleanor's family records suggested that Sarah's subsequent watching of the Blackwood family had been motivated by a combination of obsessive love and desire for revenge. She had been studying their domestic routines, perhaps planning some kind of confrontation or desperate attempt to reclaim the life she felt had been stolen from her. The 1889 portrait session had provided Sarah with an opportunity to insert herself into the Blackwood family image, creating a permanent record of her presence in their lives despite being excluded from their actual family unit. Dr. Sterling realized that Sarah's appearance in the family portrait represented more than simple voyeurism or mental disturbance. It was a deliberate act of claiming her place within the family structure that had rejected her, using the permanence of photography to ensure that she would always be part of the Blackwood family record. The direct stare into the camera showed that Sarah had been fully aware of the photography session and had positioned herself to be captured in the image. Her expression suggested both triumph at finally being included in the family portrait and something darker that reflected her complex feelings of love, loss, and resentment. Dr. Sterling's investigation expanded to include research into what had eventually happened to Sarah Whitmore after the 1889 portrait session. Local records showed that the mysterious sightings of a woman watching families had ended abruptly in November 1889, just a few weeks after the Blackwood portrait was taken. The final recorded sighting had occurred on November 15, 1889, when Sarah had been seen standing outside the Blackwood house during a heavy snowstorm, apparently watching through the parlor window where the family was gathered for an evening meal. Jonathan Blackwood had finally confronted Sarah directly, according to a police report filed the following day. The confrontation had been witnessed by several neighbors, who reported hearing raised voices and seeing Sarah flee into the storm after Jonathan had threatened to have her arrested for harassment and trespassing. Sarah Whitmore was never seen again after that November evening. Spring thaw in 1890 had revealed her body in Miller's Pond, about 2 miles from the Blackwood house. The coroner's report had ruled her death a suicide by drowning, concluding that she had taken her own life sometime during the winter months following her final confrontation with Jonathan. The discovery of Sarah's fate provided closure to the mystery of her identity and motivation, but it also added new layers of tragedy and complexity to the family portrait that captured her final appearance in the Blackwoods' lives. Dr. Sterling realized that the 1889 photograph represented a unique document of obsessive love, family secrets, and the devastating consequences of social scandal in Victorian society. Sarah's face in the window served as a haunting reminder of the hidden passions and desperate struggles that existed beneath the formal surface of 19th-century family life. Eleanor Whitmore's response to learning about Sarah's story was complex, combining sympathy for Sarah's tragic fate with disturbed feelings about having a document of obsessive surveillance in her family's treasured portrait collection. The photograph that had been displayed proudly for more than a century as a symbol of family prosperity and stability had been transformed into something much more complex and unsettling, revealing secrets that had been hidden even from family members who had lived through the original events. Eleanor decided to donate the portrait to the Vermont Historical Society, where it would be preserved as an important document of 19th-century social history, while also serving as a cautionary tale about the hidden complexities that could exist within seemingly perfect Victorian families. Dr. Sterling's investigation had revealed that the mysterious face in the window represented far more than a simple photographic curiosity. It documented a tragic story of obsessive love, social scandal, and the desperate lengths to which people might go to claim their place in families and communities that had rejected them. The case attracted attention from researchers studying Victorian-era social history, particularly those interested in the hidden aspects of 19th-century domestic life that were rarely documented in official records or family memories. Sarah Whitmore's story provided rare insight into the experiences of women who had been marginalized by social scandal and the psychological impacts of exclusion from the domestic institutions that defined women's roles and identities during the Victorian period. The photograph had become an important primary source document for understanding the complex social dynamics that existed within Victorian communities, revealing how family portraits could capture not only official family relationships, but also the excluded individuals who remained connected to families through obsession, resentment, or desperate hope. Dr. Sterling's research methodology, combining technical photographic analysis with extensive historical investigation and genealogical research, became a model for analyzing mysterious elements in historical photographs and understanding their broader social and cultural contexts. The case demonstrated the importance of examining historical images with modern technology and analytical techniques, revealing details and stories that had been invisible to earlier generations of viewers and researchers. Contemporary applications of Dr. Sterling's work influenced fields ranging from forensic photography to family genealogy research, providing tools and frameworks that could be used to investigate mysteries and reveal hidden stories in photographic collections around the world. The Blackwood family portrait, joined a growing collection of analyzed Victorian photographs that revealed the complex social realities hidden beneath the formal surface of 19th-century family images, contributing to a more complete and nuanced understanding of Victorian domestic life and social relationships. Sarah Whitmore's tragic story served as a reminder that historical photographs often contained multiple layers of meaning and significance that could only be understood through careful investigation and analysis of their social and cultural contexts. The face in the window that had haunted Eleanor Whitmore and disturbed Dr. Sterling would forever serve as a symbol of the excluded individuals whose stories had been hidden from official family histories but preserved in the accidental details of photographic documentation. The 1889 portrait had evolved from a simple family keepsake into a complex historical document that revealed the hidden passions, social scandals, and tragic consequences that had shaped the lives of both included and excluded members of Victorian communities. Dr. Sterling's investigation had demonstrated that some mysteries could be solved through careful research and analysis, but the solutions often revealed stories that were more complex and disturbing than the original mysteries themselves. The perfectly ordinary family portrait had become a window into the extraordinary complexities of human emotion, social pressure, and the desperate lengths to which people would go to claim their place in the families and communities they desperately wanted to join. Sarah Whitmore's pale face pressed against the glass would continue to stare out from the 1889 photograph, serving as an eternal reminder that behind every perfect family image lay hidden stories of love, loss, obsession, and the tragic consequences of social exclusion in Victorian America. But the investigation into Sarah Whitmore's tragic story was about to take an unexpected turn that would reveal the true scope of obsessive surveillance that had characterized her final years. 3 weeks after Dr. Sterling published her findings about the Blackwood family portrait, she received a flood of correspondence from historical societies, museums, and private collectors across New England who had discovered similar mysterious figures lurking in their own Victorian-era family photographs. The first significant contact came from the Massachusetts Historical Society, where curator Dr. James Morrison had been systematically reviewing their collection of 1880s family portraits, using the same digital enhancement techniques that had revealed Sarah's presence in the Blackwood photograph. Dr. Morrison's investigation had uncovered 17 different family photographs from the greater New England region, all dating between 1887 and 1889, that showed the same mysterious woman watching families from windows, doorways, and garden shadows. Dr. Sterling traveled to Boston to examine the Massachusetts collection, bringing with her the advanced photographic analysis equipment that had proven so valuable in studying the Blackwood portrait. What she discovered in the Historical Society's archives would fundamentally transform her understanding of Sarah Whitmore's obsession and reveal a pattern of surveillance that had extended far beyond the single family in Rutland. The 17 photographs showed Sarah Whitmore observing families throughout Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont during what appeared to be a systematic campaign of watching and studying domestic family life. In each image, Sarah appeared in the background or periphery of formal family portraits, always positioned to observe the families without being included in their official compositions. The families in these photographs represented a cross-section of prosperous New England society during the late 1880s, merchants, professionals, farmers, and small business owners who had achieved the domestic stability and social respectability that Sarah had been denied. Each family included children of various ages, suggesting that Sarah had been particularly focused on observing complete family units that represented the life she had lost when her affair with Jonathan Blackwood had been discovered. Most remarkably, the photographs revealed that Sarah had somehow gained access to private homes and family properties across a wide geographical area, indicating a level of planning and determination that far exceeded simple local stalking behavior. She had apparently been traveling throughout New England, systematically seeking out and observing families whose domestic happiness reminded her of her own lost opportunities. Dr. Morrison's research had revealed that several of the families in the Massachusetts photographs had reported incidents similar to those experienced by the Blackwoods: mysterious figures watching their homes, unexplained disturbances, and the unsettling sensation of being observed during private family moments. However, none of these families had connected their experiences to the formal portrait sessions where Sarah's presence had been accidentally captured. The scope of Sarah's surveillance activities suggested a level of obsession and systematic planning that transformed her from a local stalker into something approaching a serial observer whose activities had affected dozens of families across multiple states. Her appearance in so many different family portraits indicated that she had been using formal photography sessions as opportunities to insert herself into the documented lives of families whose happiness she desperately wanted to understand or possess. Dr. Sterling worked with Dr. Morrison to develop a comprehensive timeline of Sarah's movements based on the dates and locations of the photographs where she appeared. The timeline revealed that Sarah had been traveling constantly during her final 2 years, covering hundreds of miles and visiting numerous communities as she pursued her obsessive study of family life. The pattern of her movements suggested that Sarah had been following specific routes and targeting particular types of families, focusing on households that included children and appeared to represent stable, prosperous domestic arrangements. She had somehow identified families who were planning to have formal portraits taken and had positioned herself to be present during these sessions. The logistics of Sarah's surveillance campaign raised disturbing questions about how she had supported herself financially during her travels and how she had gained the information necessary to locate families and predict their photography appointments. The level of planning and resources required for her activities suggested either independent financial means or assistance from unknown accomplices who had helped facilitate her obsessive behavior. Dr. Sterling's investigation expanded to include research into Sarah's background and family circumstances, hoping to understand how she had developed the resources and knowledge necessary for her extensive surveillance activities. Court records from Rutland County revealed that Sarah had inherited a substantial sum of money from her grandfather's estate in 1886, providing her with the financial independence necessary for extended travel and extended periods without employment. The inheritance had given Sarah approximately $3,000, a considerable sum in the 1880s that would have been sufficient to support her travel and accommodation expenses throughout New England for several years. The timing of the inheritance, occurring just 1 year before her affair with Jonathan Blackwood was discovered, explained how she had been able to finance her subsequent obsessive activities. More disturbing was the discovery that Sarah had used her inheritance to employ private investigators and information brokers who had helped her identify suitable families and gather intelligence about their domestic arrangements and photography appointments. Business records from several Boston-area private investigation firms showed payments from Sarah Whitmore for services including domestic surveillance and family research that had supported her stalking activities. The professional assistance that Sarah had purchased revealed that her obsession had been systematic and methodical rather than impulsive or random. She had been conducting what amounted to a scientific study of family life, using professional resources to identify subjects and gather information that would enable her to observe their domestic happiness without detection. Dr. Morrison's research had meanwhile uncovered additional evidence of Sarah's activities in the form of detailed journals and notebooks that had been found among her possessions after her death in 1890. The journals, preserved in the Rutland County Historical Society, contained meticulous records of her observations of dozens of families, including detailed descriptions of their daily routines, family relationships, and domestic arrangements. The journals revealed the full extent of Sarah's obsession with family life and her desperate desire to understand and somehow possess the domestic happiness that had been denied to her. She had recorded intimate details about the families she observed, including conversations overheard through windows, information about family conflicts and celebrations, and detailed analysis of the relationships between family members. Most disturbing were Sarah's written fantasies about inserting herself into the families she observed, with elaborate scenarios in which she imagined replacing wives and mothers or becoming part of extended family networks. The journals showed that Sarah had developed detailed knowledge about the families she stalked and had created alternate realities in which she belonged to their domestic circles. The journals also revealed that Sarah had been aware of being photographed during family portrait sessions and had deliberately positioned herself to be captured in these images. She had viewed the photographs as a way of creating permanent records of her presence in the family's lives, ensuring that she would always be part of their documented history, even though she was excluded from their actual relationships. Dr. Sterling consulted with Dr. Patricia Chen, a specialist in Victorian-era psychology at Harvard Medical School, hoping to understand the psychological factors that had driven Sarah's extensive surveillance activities and obsessive behavior. Dr. Chen's analysis of Sarah's journals and documented activities revealed patterns consistent with what would now be recognized as severe obsessive-compulsive disorder combined with delusional thinking about relationships and social belonging. According to Dr. Chen's assessment, Sarah's broken engagement and excluded affair had triggered a psychological breakdown that had manifested as compulsive need to observe and study successful family relationships. Her surveillance activities had been motivated by a desperate attempt to understand what she had lost and to find ways of reclaiming or replacing the domestic happiness that had been taken from her. The systematic nature of Sarah's activities, combined with the detailed records she maintained and the professional assistance she employed, indicated a level of organized thinking that distinguished her case from typical stalking behavior. Sarah had been conducting what she apparently viewed as research into family life, using scientific methods to study relationships and domestic arrangements that she hoped to eventually replicate or possess. Dr. Chen's psychological analysis revealed that Sarah's appearance in family photographs represented more than simple surveillance. It documented her attempts to create connections with families and to establish her presence within their documented histories. The photographs had served as a form of parasocial relationship building that allowed Sarah to feel connected to families who were unaware of her existence. The investigation had attracted attention from criminologists and forensic psychologists who were interested in Sarah's case as an early example of systematic stalking behavior that had involved multiple victims across extensive geographical areas. Professor Michael Davidson, at the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, studied Sarah's journals and documented activities as part of research into historical patterns of obsessive surveillance and stalking. Professor Davidson's analysis revealed that Sarah's activities had followed patterns similar to those seen in contemporary serial stalking cases, with systematic target selection, extensive surveillance activities, and elaborate fantasy relationships with victims who were unaware of being observed. Sarah's case provided valuable historical insight into how such behaviors had manifested before modern legal frameworks and law enforcement techniques had been developed to address stalking crimes. The research had practical applications for understanding contemporary stalking behavior and developing improved methods for detecting and preventing similar crimes. Sarah's systematic approach and use of professional assistance demonstrated how stalkers could employ sophisticated methods to avoid detection while conducting extensive surveillance of multiple victims. Dr. Sterling's investigation had meanwhile expanded to include research into the families that had been targeted by Sarah's surveillance activities, hoping to understand the long-term impacts of her obsessive observation on the victims who had been unaware of being stalked. Follow-up research into the Massachusetts families revealed that several had experienced ongoing problems with anxiety, family conflicts, and domestic disturbances that had persisted for years after Sarah's death. Descendants of the targeted families reported family stories about unexplained feelings of being watched, household disturbances, and general unease that had characterized their ancestors' experiences during the late 1880s and early 1890s. These reports suggested that Sarah's surveillance activities had created lasting psychological impacts on her victims, even though they had been largely unaware of the extent of her obsessive observation. The discovery that Sarah had been systematically stalking multiple families created new appreciation for the courage shown by Jonathan Blackwood in finally confronting her directly in November 1889. His willingness to challenge Sarah's behavior had apparently ended her surveillance activities and may have prevented her from expanding her stalking to additional victims. However, the confrontation had also contributed to Sarah's final psychological breakdown and suicide, raising complex questions about the appropriate responses to obsessive stalking behavior and the responsibilities of victims and community members in addressing such situations. Dr. Sterling worked with legal historians to examine how Sarah's stalking activities would have been addressed by law enforcement and legal systems during the 1880s, when concepts of privacy, harassment, and stalking had not yet been developed into formal legal frameworks. The research revealed that Sarah's victims had possessed limited legal remedies for addressing her behavior, and that community responses had been largely informal and ineffective. The lack of legal protections for stalking victims during the Victorian era had enabled Sarah to conduct her surveillance activities for nearly 2 years without significant interference from law enforcement or legal authorities. Her case demonstrated the need for comprehensive legal frameworks that could address obsessive surveillance behavior and provide protection for victims of systematic stalking. Contemporary applications of Sarah's case had begun to influence victim advocacy programs and legal reforms designed to improve protection for stalking victims and enhance law enforcement responses to obsessive surveillance behavior. Sarah's systematic methods and extensive victim targeting provided examples that helped train law enforcement officers and victim advocates in recognizing and responding to complex stalking situations. The photographic evidence of Sarah's surveillance activities had become particularly valuable for training programs because it provided visual documentation of how stalkers could insert themselves into victims' documented lives while remaining largely undetected by the victims themselves. Dr. Morrison established a permanent archive of Sarah Whitmore's stalking documentation, including the 17 family photographs, her personal journals, and related materials that provided comprehensive evidence of her systematic surveillance activities. The archive became a valuable resource for researchers studying historical crime patterns, Victorian social behavior, and the evolution of stalking as a recognized criminal activity. The archive also served educational purposes, helping students and researchers understand how domestic violence and stalking behavior had manifested in historical periods when such activities were not recognized as serious crimes requiring formal legal responses. Eleanor Whitmore had followed the expanding investigation with growing understanding of the full scope of Sarah's obsessive behavior and its impacts on numerous families throughout New England. Her decision to seek analysis of the family portrait had uncovered a much larger story about stalking, obsession, and the hidden dangers that had threatened Victorian families who had appeared safe and secure in their domestic arrangements. The revelation that the Blackwood family had been just one target in Sarah's extensive surveillance campaign transformed Eleanor's understanding of her family's experience and provided context for family stories about feeling watched and experiencing unexplained disturbances during the late 1880s. Eleanor decided to establish a foundation dedicated to researching historical crime patterns and supporting contemporary stalking victims, using Sarah's case as an example of how obsessive surveillance behavior had affected families throughout American history. The foundation would provide resources for historical research, victim advocacy, and educational programs designed to raise awareness about stalking behavior and its impacts on victims and communities. Dr. Sterling's investigation had evolved from a simple photographic analysis into a comprehensive study of Victorian-era stalking behavior that had implications for understanding historical crime patterns, victim experiences, and the evolution of legal and social responses to obsessive surveillance activities. Her work had demonstrated that historical photographs could serve as valuable primary source documents for understanding criminal behavior, victim experiences, and community responses to activities that had not yet been recognized as serious crimes requiring formal intervention. The case had established photographic analysis as a legitimate tool for historical crime research and had provided methodologies that could be applied to investigating other mysterious or unexplained elements in historical photograph collections. Sarah Whitmore's tragic story served as a reminder that obsessive love and social exclusion could drive individuals to extreme behaviors that threatened the safety and security of entire communities. Her systematic stalking activities had affected dozens of families and had created lasting trauma that had persisted for generations. The face in the window of the 1889 Blackwood family portrait had evolved from a mysterious curiosity into documented evidence of systematic criminal behavior that had threatened the security of Victorian families throughout New England. Sarah's pale features pressed against the glass served as a permanent reminder of the hidden dangers that could lurk behind the formal surface of 19th-century domestic life. Dr. Sterling's investigation had revealed that some historical mysteries concealed stories that were more disturbing and complex than the original unexplained phenomena, and that careful research and analysis could uncover truths about human behavior that challenged comfortable assumptions about the safety and security of past societies. The perfectly ordinary family portrait that had seemed harmless for more than a century had become a window into extraordinary criminal behavior that had affected numerous victims and had demonstrated the sophisticated methods that obsessive individuals could employ to conduct systematic surveillance of their targets. Eleanor Whitmore's family treasure had been transformed into a historical crime document that provided valuable insights into stalking behavior, victim experiences, and the challenges faced by communities attempting to address obsessive surveillance activities during periods when such behavior was not yet recognized as serious criminal conduct. Sarah Whitmore would forever stare out from the window of the Blackwood family portrait, serving as an eternal reminder that behind the formal surface of Victorian domestic life lay hidden dangers that could threaten the safety and security of families who believed themselves safe within their own homes. The 1889 photograph had become more than a family keepsake or historical curiosity. It had evolved into a powerful document of criminal behavior, victim experience, and the tragic consequences of obsessive love that had been denied the domestic happiness it desperately sought to possess or destroy. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Dr. Sterling received contact from international researchers who had discovered similar patterns of systematic stalking behavior, documented in Victorian-era photographs from across the Atlantic. Dr. Helena Richardson from Oxford University's Department of Social History had been conducting parallel research into mysterious figures appearing in 19th-century family photography when she learned about the Sarah Whitmore case through academic publications. Dr. Richardson's investigation had uncovered evidence of comparable stalking behavior in England during the same time period, with documented cases of obsessive individuals who had systematically observed and infiltrated the photographic documentation of numerous families across multiple counties. The international scope of similar behavior suggested that Sarah's case was part of a broader phenomenon that had affected Victorian communities on both sides of the Atlantic. The British cases revealed remarkably similar patterns to those documented in Sarah's activities. Inheritance or independent financial resources that enabled extensive travel, systematic target selection focusing on prosperous families with children, professional assistance from private investigators and information brokers, and deliberate positioning to be captured in formal family photographs while remaining undetected by the families themselves. Dr. Richardson had identified 3 separate cases in England where obsessive individuals had conducted multi-year surveillance campaigns that had affected dozens of families each. Like Sarah, these stalkers had maintained detailed journals documenting their observations and had developed elaborate fantasy relationships with families who were unaware of being watched. The most comparable case involved a woman named Margaret Thornfield, who had conducted systematic stalking activities throughout the Cotswolds region between 1885 and 1888. Margaret had used an inheritance from her deceased husband to finance extensive travel and surveillance activities, employing private investigators to identify suitable target families and gather intelligence about their domestic arrangements. Margaret's case had ended tragically when she had attempted to kidnap a child from one of the families she had been observing, believing that she could integrate herself into their family structure by forcibly inserting herself into their domestic arrangements. The attempted kidnapping had resulted in her arrest, trial, and eventual commitment to an asylum where she had died in 1891. The international research collaboration revealed that the phenomenon of systematic family stalking during the Victorian era had been more widespread than previously recognized, with documented cases in England, France, Germany, and the United States showing remarkably consistent patterns of behavior, motivation, and methodology. Dr. Sterling worked with Dr. A. Richardson and researchers from other European institutions to develop a comprehensive database of Victorian-era stalking cases. creating the first systematic documentation of obsessive surveillance behavior during the 19th century. The database included photographic evidence, personal journals, legal records, and family accounts that provided unprecedented insight into historical stalking behavior and its impacts on victims and communities. The international research revealed that Victorian society's emphasis on domestic privacy and family respectability had created ideal conditions for systematic stalking behavior to flourish undetected. The formal nature of family photography, combined with limited legal protections for privacy and harassment, had enabled obsessive individuals to conduct extensive surveillance activities while remaining largely invisible to both their victims and law enforcement authorities. The research also revealed that stalking behavior during the Victorian era had been significantly enabled by the period's transportation infrastructure, which had made extensive travel possible for individuals with sufficient financial resources, and by the availability of private investigation services that could be purchased to support surveillance activities. Dr. Sterling's investigation had meanwhile attracted attention from the Vermont State Police, who were interested in applying historical crime research to contemporary cold cases and unsolved mysteries. Detective Captain Maria Santos contacted Dr. Sterling with information about modern cases that showed similarities to the Victorian-era stalking patterns that had been documented in the research. Captain Santos had been investigating a series of contemporary stalking incidents that had affected families throughout Vermont and New Hampshire, cases that showed troubling parallels to the historical patterns revealed in Sarah's documented activities. The contemporary stalker had been using social media, online databases, and digital photography to conduct systematic surveillance of multiple families, employing methods that were technologically updated versions of the techniques that Sarah had used more than a century earlier. The collaboration between historical crime research and contemporary law enforcement investigation revealed continuities in stalking behavior that transcended technological and social changes, with obsessive individuals continuing to employ systematic methods for identifying, observing, and infiltrating the lives of families whose domestic happiness they sought to understand, possess, or destroy. Dr. Sterling worked with Captain Santos to develop investigative techniques that combined historical crime analysis with contemporary forensic methods, creating approaches that could be applied to both cold cases and ongoing stalking investigations. The historical research provided valuable insights into stalking behavior patterns that helped contemporary investigators understand the psychology and methodology of obsessive surveillance. The Vermont State Police collaboration resulted in the development of new training programs for law enforcement officers that incorporated historical crime research into contemporary stalking investigation techniques. The programs helped officers recognize systematic stalking patterns and understand the long-term impacts of obsessive surveillance behavior on victims and communities. Dr. Richardson's research had meanwhile expanded to include investigation of the social and cultural factors that had contributed to the prevalence of systematic stalking behavior during the Victorian era. Her analysis revealed that the period's restrictive social norms regarding women's roles, marriage expectations, and domestic relationships had created psychological pressures that could trigger obsessive behavior in individuals who were excluded from conventional family structures. The Victorian emphasis on domestic ideology and family respectability had created intense social pressure for individuals to achieve conventional domestic success, while simultaneously limiting the options available for those who were unable to conform to expected social roles. This combination of pressure and limited alternatives had created conditions that could trigger extreme responses in psychologically vulnerable individuals. Dr. Richardson's research revealed that many Victorian-era stalkers had been women who had been excluded from conventional domestic roles through broken engagements, failed marriages, social scandal, or economic circumstances. Their stalking behavior had represented desperate attempts to understand and access the domestic happiness that society had taught them to value above all other achievements. The gendered nature of Victorian stalking behavior reflected broader patterns of social exclusion and limited opportunities for women who could not or would not conform to conventional domestic expectations. The research revealed that stalking had often been a response to social marginalization rather than simply individual psychological dysfunction. Dr. Sterling collaborated with Dr. Richardson to organize an international conference on historical crime patterns and their contemporary applications, bringing together researchers, law enforcement officials, and victim advocates to discuss the implications of Victorian stalking research for understanding and addressing contemporary obsessive surveillance behavior. The conference, titled Hidden Histories, Victorian Crime Patterns and Contemporary Justice, attracted participants from universities, law enforcement agencies, and victim advocacy organizations across North America and Europe. The presentations revealed that historical crime research could provide valuable insights for contemporary criminal justice practices and victim support services. The conference proceedings included presentations on the use of photographic evidence in historical crime investigation, the psychological factors that contributed to systematic stalking behavior, the evolution of legal protections for stalking victims, and the applications of historical research for training law enforcement officers and victim advocates. The international attention generated by the conference led to the establishment of collaborative research programs between academic institutions and law enforcement agencies, creating ongoing partnerships that could apply historical crime research to contemporary criminal justice challenges. Dr. Morrison's archive of Sarah Whitmore's stalking documentation had meanwhile become a central resource for researchers studying historical crime patterns, victim experiences, and the evolution of criminal justice responses to obsessive surveillance behavior. The archive attracted visiting researchers from around the world who were interested in examining the comprehensive documentation of systematic stalking activities. The archive's educational programs had been expanded to include training modules for law enforcement officers, victim advocates, and mental health professionals who worked with stalking victims and offenders. The historical perspective provided by Sarah's case helped contemporary professionals understand the long-term patterns and impacts of obsessive surveillance behavior. Eleanor Whitmore's Foundation had grown into a significant organization that provided support for stalking victims, funding for historical crime research, and educational programs designed to raise awareness about the warning signs and impacts of obsessive surveillance behavior. The Foundation's work had been informed by the extensive research into Sarah's case and its historical context. The Foundation had established partnerships with law enforcement agencies, victim advocacy organizations, and academic institutions to create comprehensive approaches to addressing stalking behavior that combined historical understanding with contemporary intervention techniques. The Foundation's victim support programs incorporated lessons learned from the Victorian-era research, helping contemporary stalking victims understand that obsessive surveillance behavior had historical precedents and that their experiences were part of recognizable patterns that could be addressed through appropriate intervention and support services. Dr. Sterling's investigation had evolved into a comprehensive research program that examined the intersection of historical crime patterns, photographic evidence, and contemporary criminal justice practices. Her work had demonstrated that historical photographs could serve as valuable primary source documents for understanding criminal behavior, victim experiences, and the evolution of legal and social responses to various forms of criminal activity. The methodologies that Dr. Sterling had developed for analyzing mysterious elements in historical photographs had been applied to investigating other types of criminal behavior documented in photographic evidence, including fraud, identity theft, domestic violence, and various forms of property crime. Her work had established photographic analysis as a legitimate tool for historical crime research and had created frameworks that could be applied to investigating unexplained or suspicious elements in photograph collections held by museums, historical societies, and private families around the world. The Sarah Whitmore case had become a landmark example of how careful investigation and analysis could reveal complex criminal behavior hidden within seemingly innocent historical photographs, demonstrating that some mysteries concealed stories that were far more disturbing and significant than their initial appearances suggested. Dr. Chen's psychological research had been expanded to include comprehensive analysis of the factors that contributed to systematic stalking behavior during the Victorian era, revealing patterns that continued to influence contemporary understanding of obsessive surveillance activities and their treatment. Her research had revealed that stalking behavior during the Victorian era had often been triggered by social exclusion, economic displacement, or psychological trauma related to failed relationships or social expectations. The systematic nature of Victorian stalking activities had reflected the period's emphasis on methodical approaches to problem-solving and the availability of resources that could be employed to support extensive surveillance campaigns. The psychological profiles that Dr. Chen had developed based on Victorian stalking cases had proven valuable for contemporary mental health professionals working with stalking offenders and victims. The historical perspective provided insights into the long-term patterns and developmental factors that could contribute to obsessive surveillance behavior. The research had also revealed that stalking behavior during the Victorian era had often been enabled by social attitudes that minimized the seriousness of harassment and surveillance activities, particularly when they were conducted by women or individuals from respectable social backgrounds. These historical attitudes had created environments where systematic stalking could continue for extended periods, without intervention from family members, community leaders, or law enforcement officials, who might have been able to prevent the escalation of obsessive behavior into more dangerous activities. The legal history research that had been conducted in connection with Sarah's case had revealed significant gaps in Victorian-era legal protections for harassment and stalking victims, gaps that had enabled obsessive individuals to conduct systematic surveillance activities without fear of legal consequences. The research had documented the evolution of legal frameworks for addressing stalking behavior, from the informal community responses of the Victorian era to contemporary legal systems that recognized stalking as a serious crime requiring formal intervention and punishment. The historical perspective provided by the research had informed contemporary efforts to strengthen legal protections for stalking victims and improve law enforcement responses to obsessive surveillance behavior. The documentation of Victorian-era stalking cases had provided compelling evidence for the need for comprehensive legal frameworks that could address the complex patterns and long-term impacts of systematic surveillance activities. The international collaboration that had grown out of Dr. Sterling's investigation had created ongoing research partnerships that continued to investigate historical crime patterns and their contemporary applications. The partnerships had expanded to include institutions and researchers from additional countries, creating a global network of scholars working to understand the historical dimensions of various forms of criminal behavior. The research network had established standardized methodologies for investigating mysterious elements in historical photographs, creating protocols that could be applied by researchers around the world to uncover hidden stories and criminal activities documented in photographic collections. The network had also developed educational programs and training materials that could be used by museums, historical societies, and educational institutions to help students and community members understand the complex social and criminal histories that could be revealed through careful analysis of historical photographs and documents. As Dr. Sterling reflected on the years of investigation that had grown out of Eleanor Whitmore's original request for photographic analysis, she realized that the seemingly simple mystery of a face in a window had revealed complex patterns of criminal behavior, victim experience, and social response that had implications far beyond the specific case of Sarah Whitmore and the Blackwood family. The investigation had demonstrated that historical photographs could serve as windows into aspects of past societies that had been hidden or forgotten, revealing stories that challenged comfortable assumptions about the safety, security, and social harmony of earlier periods in history. Sarah's case had provided evidence that systematic criminal behavior had existed throughout history, often employing sophisticated methods and resources that enabled offenders to avoid detection while causing significant harm to their victims and communities. The pale face pressed against the window of the 1889 Blackwood family portrait would forever serve as a reminder that behind the formal surface of historical family life lay complex human stories that could include criminal behavior, victim experience, and community responses that continued to influence contemporary society. The photograph that had appeared harmless for more than a century had become a powerful symbol of the hidden histories that could be revealed through careful investigation and analysis, demonstrating that some historical mysteries concealed truths that were more disturbing and significant than anyone could have initially imagined. Eleanor Whitmore's decision to seek professional analysis of her family's treasured portrait had uncovered a story that had transformed understanding of Victorian-era crime patterns while providing valuable insights for contemporary criminal justice practices and victim support services. The investigation had revealed that some family treasures contained documentation of criminal activities that had affected multiple generations of victims, and that careful research could uncover truths about historical behavior that had ongoing implications for understanding and addressing contemporary social problems. Sarah Whitmore's obsessive surveillance activities had been preserved in photographic evidence that continued to provide insights into criminal behavior, victim experiences, and the importance of comprehensive legal and social responses to systematic stalking and harassment. The face in the window would continue to stare out from the 1889 photograph, serving as an eternal reminder that vigilance and careful investigation were necessary to uncover and address the hidden dangers that could threaten the safety and security of families and communities throughout history.